The Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.thebenjamindixonshow.com to register for our blog and join the Progressive Army. And now, ladies and gentlemen,
we are now about to witness the truth.
It's the Benjamin Dixon Show.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Benjamin Dixon Show. I am, of course, your host, Benjamin Dixon. It is Thursday night, June 9th, 2016. I want to thank you for joining us. I don't take it for granted, all of you who tune in on a regular basis. Either you're tuning in live or you're watching the post podcast or wherever you're tuning in. Thanks so much for joining us. Tonight, I am excited and elated to be joined by the distinguished scholar, Professor Adolph Reed, Jr. Professor Reed is a big influence in my life and a lot of other people's lives. We got a lot of response when I mentioned that he was going to be coming on. So we are just extremely excited to have this very important conversation and to unpack some of the things that he has done historically and in this particular election. But before I bring him on, let me just read just a little bit about him. I know everyone listening probably already knows this, but Professor Reed is a professor of political science at the University of Pennsylvania, specializing in race and American politics. He's previously taught at Yale, Northwestern, the New School for Social Research, contributor and columnist with The Progressive and The Nation. He is a public intellectual and a public scholar, and we are so excited to have him here tonight. Professor Reed, how are you?
Oh, good. And thanks very much for having me. It's a pleasure to meet, pleasure to be on.
Excellent. And it's definitely, we're honored to have you here. We're so excited about the conversation that we can have. But if you would allow me to first start with today's news, and I want you to get to weigh in on it. President Obama has come out in full support and endorsement of Hillary Clinton. For me, it's no surprise. It's very much expected. But just from your vantage point and all of the historical calculations that you make, what do you think about this endorsement and what it means for progressives, African Americans, and just the entire gambit?
Well, I mean, like you say, it's not a surprise. I mean, it's I think it's a marker of good party decorum that he held off from doing it officially until after she passed the delegate total that she needed. I mean, I think everyone's known all along that he was going to endorse her. So, and I mean, it's kind of funny, when you think about it. I mean, they are in 2008. The big Clintonist fundraisers apparently thought that he was a better representative of their agenda than she was. So now they're just kind of passing the baton back and forth.
Yeah, I like what you said there in terms of it is a good decorum that he even waited this long. I don't think anyone should be shocked or surprised, but some people are a little dismayed, I would say, to put it lightly, that President Obama, who at one time considered Hillary Clinton to be a liar, to be someone who will say anything to get political power, now is endorsing this and wants us to support this very same person. Is this just the cost of high-level politics, that who once was your political rival that you had to eviscerate, now you have to throw your support behind? And what would you say to the people who are consider themselves to the left, progressives and African Americans who are really disappointed in this?
Well, I don't know. It's a good question. I mean, I've often said that it's better, that's often better to be in the right place at the right time than it is to know anything or than to be smart, right? And in that sense, it's like parallel to my personal motto, it's better to be lucky than to be good. And I just happen to have been in what I've sometimes described lately as the birthing room at the outset of Obama's political career, because I lived in a state Senate district that he came out of when he emerged, and I was close to his predecessor in office. And that's all like kind of a long way of saying there shouldn't have been any reason to be surprised about or disappointed about anything that Obama's done in his presidency. I mean, he's never been other than than what he is now. He's never purported really to be, to be more left than he is. I mean, he's kind of specialized in giving the appearance of a simulacra of being progressive, but it's a progressive, as a way to put it, that's disconnected from any particular content. Like it's more connected with who he is, and the circular thing has always been kind of like saying, well, I know it looks like I'm doing something that's not consistent with progressive politics, but it has to be because I'm progressive, and therefore anything I do is progressive.
Right.
That said, I mean, she was a Secretary of State. They haven't really differed very much about things. I said in 2008 that in some issues she was even a little bit to the left of him. And I mean, I think that that the differences between them really aren't really very meaningful, I don't think.
Yeah, I had a conversation, I think it's about 3 weeks ago with Professor Eddie Glaude, and in his book, he was talking about how we green screened President Obama, and we projected onto him all of these expectations of progressivism and pro-blackness that he, in fact, was communicating something entirely different. And I love what you said, that, if we really shouldn't be disappointed, because if we were paying attention, we would have heard exactly his goals from the time he took the national stage, 2004, in terms of a mainstream national audience. He's always communicated that he wanted to do this. He would never use the word triangulation, but in fact, it was, to find this common ground with Republicans and conservatives. And he communicated that to us, but somehow he had the ability, or it was just our weakness, to project onto him this progressivism and this pro-blackness that he, in fact, wasn't trying to convey. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head. And, moreover, I mean, he has actually said it, right? I mean, he said it in two different ways, at two different points. I mean, his first memoir came out when we were involved in the state Senate fight, and I didn't bother to read it. I mean, it just seemed like, sort of pat memoir. And the second one came out, I think, in 04 or something like that, 05, and I didn't want to read either of them, but when I signed a deal to work on a book that was initially a book about Obama mania, I thought I had to read them both. And when I read them, I was kind of surprised, because he says in one of them, I forget which one it is, but that's part of his gift. That part of his gift is that he has a knack for convincing people that he believes what they believe, or what they want to believe that he believes. And from one perspective, you can say, well, that's what fancy law school training is all about, right? And we notice, well, the second moment that I wanted to mention where he came clean was maybe many of the viewers will remember that after he sewed up the nomination in 08, within days there was like this blitz of hard sprint to the right, where he kibitzed on the Supreme Court's ruling that overturned the D.C. gun control law, and he didn't have to say anything about it, but he did it. He said something else. He said he was disappointed about another Supreme Court ruling that I think limited death penalty for sex offenders, and he did another thing like that too. I can't remember what they were, and there was I think it may have had something to do with with the Patriot Act or surveillance, and there was a caterwauling that came from some quarters on the left, and he just responded openly and said, "Look, I never said I was a leftist, right?" And it's true, like he never had, but it's what people wanted to believe, and it's not that they were simply gullible. I mean, he was seductive in that way, but I want to underscore, another point that you made just now, because I think it's it's important for all of us like to take in, and not just about Obama. But if you look at that 2004 speech at the Democratic Convention that catapulted him onto the national, well, that and Wall Street money, catapulted him onto the national stage. It was basically like a Booker T. Washington style up from slavery speech, like adjusted to kind of weave the immigrant story in and Heartland, Midwest, and all the rest of that. But more to the point, in the summer of '08, I mean, you remember the speech that he gave here, which many people took to be his race speech, right?
Right.
What he said in that speech was he made references, or really allusions, to something that a lot of scholars have talked about for 2 decades now, which is the extent to which social policy measures that were enacted in the New Deal often had an unintended effect, basically, of or usually unintended effect of intensifying economic inequality by race. So he makes an allusion to that fact, like the not the GI Bill so much, although people say that about the GI Bill too, but federal housing policy, the early years of Social Security, and so forth and so on. But that's just an allusion that he makes, and he doesn't draw any contemporary implications for public policy from those allusions. It's like a fillip or some Mardi Gras trinkets that he tosses out to that portion of his audience. But the rest of the speech is attacking black poor people, right? And then later, like the Father's Day speech, that was all about attacking black poor people. And then there was that odious speech that he gave at some church in Houston, where he chastised black poor people again for feeding their kids Popeye's chicken for breakfast or something like that, right?
Yeah, you're Professor Reed, you are reminding me of some of those key points that really, as much as I admire, and I say this all the time, I really admire and like President Obama, but there are just some fundamental things I disagree with him on. And some of the things that you just mentioned reminds me of that deep division in the fundamental way of thinking about the problems that we face. And he most assuredly comes from that meritocratic side of the equation, where he believes just pull yourself up by your bootstraps. And I was reading his book, I think it was Dreams of My Father, where he laid out this very concise and precise language of what he believes and how the government isn't the solution to every problem, and that all these things that just speaks volumes about what he believes, but we missed it, or we didn't see it, or we allowed his language to drift us away into the moment and not realize that he really brought a lot of the same things, just wrapped it up in this beautiful. I'm thinking this was Professor Glaude saying that he used the language of overcoming, and the language of Exodus, and the language of the civil rights movement to coddle us, and not to coddle us, but to put us to sleep, and actually pulled off this amazing moment for neoliberal politics. Go ahead.
Yeah, in fact, that's what the Maoists used to call using the red book to defeat the red book, basically, right? I mean, he's always said, right, from the very beginning, and like this is like another sort of odd moment of the '08 campaign, where I found myself agreeing with Geraldine Ferraro, who was never really my cup of tea, but she pointed out that this, that his one big trick, right, as a pony, was the claim that there's something about him that will bring about agreement among people with people who fundamentally disagree with him. And Ferraro said at one point, frustratedly, of course, because she was working for Clinton, that that's just not how politics works, right? Like, it doesn't work that way, and you can only sell um, yourself as having that particular talent if you've never really fought for anything before. And sure enough, like we see what happened with healthcare reform, for instance, like he didn't want to get his hands dirty with it. So he just kind of sat back and let Congress bring something to him. And then he spent, I forget how many years now, trying to get one Republican to vote for it. I mean, because the thing was that his whole shtick is holding himself above the fray of partisan bickering. Well, you know what that means is that, as you say, you're already capitulating to the other side. And you know, it's like, you know, on the neoliberalism point. I mean, I've been saying two things about that in the last couple of years. One of them is, you know, there's more than a cottage industry now, right? There's a small industry, or maybe not so small at this point, of academics, left, right, and center, parsing what neoliberalism is supposed to be and isn't, what its distinctive features are supposedly. But in my view, it really just comes down as a practical matter to one simple thing, that neoliberalism is capitalism that's effectively foreclosed any possibility of working class opposition. So that just means that it's capitalism that's completely in charge. So that in that sense, it's not a matter, or the problem that we have now shouldn't be understood as a deviation from a new normal that got constructed after the Second World War for 2 or 3 decades. What we have now is like going back to normal, and that those 2 or 3 decades are the aberration that needs to be explained. Wow. And why I think that's important as a perspective to keep in mind is that the Obama administration has, well, look, I mean, you take, for instance, what I want to mention too, I think it's connected with this, the point you made about his commitment to an abstract meritocratic vision, which is a class vision. But that goes a long way to explaining why he and his former basketball buddy, Arnie Duncan, have been hell-bent on destroying public education as we know it, because they think that public education, like most public institutions, are for losers. And they are for losers if you govern from a standpoint that presumes that rich people are smarter than the rest of us and know what's best for all the rest of us. And I can tell you, after teaching at joints like this for the last 35 years, there's nothing farther from the truth than that.
Right. You know, all of this on President Obama, I want to let it underscore the fact that we really shouldn't be surprised about this endorsement. It's par for the course, right? This is just the exact thing that we expect him to do, and something that we really shouldn't linger on so much from a lamenting point of view. But let's shift gears a little bit and take everything that we've talked about and apply it to the conversation on this particular race between Hillary Clinton, Bernie Sanders, and the unbelievable use, in my opinion, of identity politics to undermine a class-based argument. That's been one of the things that's frustrated me the most, and I've talked ad nauseum about it on this show. I stumbled onto several articles of yours. You diagnosed this problem before we even got to this problem. And I really wish more people had heard your voice years ago when you started talking about the way that anti-racism was not specific, and it had a way of distracting from the real systemic factors that lead to racism, and breaking it down in so many different ways that, you know, this was like in 2009 you wrote this article, and now we're in this election where I've seen this like a swift boating of class-based arguments using race to the detriment of black people. I've said enough. What do you think? Go for it.
It's really bizarre, man. I got to tell you, it's really bizarre. And look, you know, in a way, I mean, you know, in the spirit of full disclosure, I've been working in the Sanders campaign since probably since the 10th anniversary of Katrina. Actually, that's when I started, in a more or less, you know, sort of quasi-official way. And I worked a lot in South Carolina. right? Getting ready for that primary down there because I've worked in South Carolina a lot and I have political connections down there in the labor movement elsewhere. We won a ballot line for a Labor Party in South Carolina in '06 and '07. And that took a lot of, grassroots organizing at flea markets and union halls and whatnot. But anyway, I was down there when John Lewis, made the crack about having seen or not recalling having seen Bernie in the civil rights movement, but that he did see Bill and Hillary. And my response to that was, well, I can see why Bernie wouldn't stand out given all who was there. And I would imagine that Hillary stood out because of that Goldwater sign she was holding, because that's what she was doing in 1964. But beyond that, which was just cheesy, right? Just kind of cheesy in a low way. Also, just a parenthetical, just a little factoid, like to transmit to the viewers and listeners. John has his history. That's true. But when John ran for that seat in 1986, he ran against Julian Bond. Julian was a progressive candidate, right? I mean, I did a little work in Julian's campaign because I'd only been out of Atlanta for about 5 years when that race came, and I knew Julian. I knew John too, but I knew Julian a lot better. And the vote tally tells it all. John got 90% of the white vote in that district and a third of the black vote. So
wow.
just to put that in perspective. But anyway, the thing that I thought was most shocking and revealing was when he and Clyburn kind of viciously attacked the idea that people might want to get free public higher education and other free public goods. And see, one of the ways that I've thought about this race all along is, and one of the things I found most potentially exciting about what the Sanders campaign could do. I mean, frankly, I've thought we've been playing with house money since January, frankly, on this. So, I'm not as kind of crestfallen as maybe a lot of other people are about how things have played out. But what putting this clear choice out in public, basically, has done, if we can capitalize on it properly, is it has precisely exposed the class contradictions inside black politics, and within the Democratic Party, right? I mean, more broadly, because the thing that you describe is absolutely stunning, right? I mean, especially when you think about the legacy of people like A. Philip Randolph and Bayard Rustin, and even Martin Luther King, right? I mean, this is through until well into the Black Power era, right? There was a general understanding that improving the condition of Black Americans in the society hinged as much on having a full employment economy and an expanding social state and a vibrant industrial union movement as it did on anti-discrimination law. And in fact, as early as the early 1960s, before the March on Washington, which was originated by Randolph and the Negro American Labor Council, Randolph argued that most black unemployment, right, could be explained not by discrimination, but by the consequences, or most immediately by the consequences of economic transformation, which 2 decades after World War II was mainly called automation, right? So it's like jobs leaving areas where black people and many Latinos were. And it wasn't just that the jobs were leaving to go to the suburbs; they were already beginning, to be automated out of existence, and leaving the country. And I mean, this is a phenomenon. One of the nice things about being an old guy, there aren't a lot, but one of them is that you see phenomena like this happening, and you recognize what's going on. And what's happened now, and I think that this is largely was consolidated by the Clinton administration and and subsequent democratic or the centrist or dominant wing, I should say, like of the Democratic Party, has just been tightening the grip, is a disconnection of the notion of social justice from economic from economic inequality and economic security. And that, I mean, that's a notion of racial justice that, first of all, fits very comfortably with the people in elite colleges I've been teaching for the last 35 years, because they were all expected to be part of the upper class. But it also has meant that we have a national politics now, and this takes us back to the fault lines in the current race, that we have a national politics now that has, for 20 years at least, longer, given us two choices. And one of them is a party that's committed to Wall Street and to neoliberalism, and is deeply and earnestly committed to a notion of diversity and multiculturalism, and a party that's committed to Wall Street and neoliberalism and is deeply opposed to multiculturalism and diversity. So if we have to choose between those two, obviously for most of us who are committed to a notion, to the ideals of justice and equality, the one that's committed to multiculturalism and diversity is less bad than the one that's opposed to them. But the deeper problem is that they're both actively committed to maintaining and intensifying economic inequality. And as I and my friend and colleague Walter Ben Michaels have pointed out tirelessly over the last decade or so, that ideal of a just society is one in which 1% of the population can control 90% of the stuff.
Right.
But it would be just if 12% of the 1% were black, and 14% were Latino, and half of them were women, and and whatever percentages were gay. And what that means then is that most black people, and most Latinos, and most white people, right, and most Asian Americans would be stuck holding like the end of the stick with the stuff on it that I assume I can't call by its right, right. But that's where we are. But it's I think the potential of this campaign, though, is that if we as progressives are willing, right, to do some serious strategic thinking, right, and about how to go about trying to build a political movement outside the mass media, because you can't do it there, frankly. I mean, too many people are trying, but you can't build a movement on the web, basically. But to think about how to take advantage of this contradiction that's been, that the Democratic race, but also the Republican one, has thrown up, right, and laid bare. And it would make sense to think about trying to find ways like to organize in neighborhoods and workplaces and trade union locals, right, and elsewhere, schools, around this revelation, basically, because this says to us that we absolutely need to have like a different kind of politics.
Yeah. So that segment right there, that I don't know if it was 5 or 7 minutes, but you said so much that we really could just take apart that section alone and talk for the next 3 or 4 weeks, particularly with the disconnection of social justice from economic justice. And to me, that's been a well, I want to ask you this. Do you feel that let's talk about anti-racism for 1 second in this context. Do you feel that the vague nature of the anti-racism movement and sentiment, do you feel like that's intentional, or do you feel like that's just kind of a shortcoming? And the reason I ask it in that context is this disconnection between social justice and economic justice. Likewise, do you feel like that's intentional, or is it just a failing of this identity politics era that we've evolved into?
Wow, that's a tough question. In fact, I was going to apologize about the last segment too, because I was going to say that I got a feeling that you asked me what time it is, and I told you how to make a watch. But no, that's a really tough one. I mean, I think the real answer is some of all of the above, right? I've also taken, like, in recent years to quoting a statement from Upton Sinclair that it's very difficult to convince a man to believe something when his living depends on him not believing it. And my father had a quip too that was like a definition of what ideology is in the one Marxist sense. And he said that ideology is the mechanism that harmonizes the principles that you want to believe that you hold with what advances your material interest in the world, right? So, and the reciprocal of that aphorism that he always mentioned, I can hear his voice ringing in my head saying this all the time, that sincerity is vastly overrated as a political virtue. And he'd say, for instance, depending on how he felt, which day, which case he would cite, but Himmler was very sincere, right? So the problem isn't that Himmler wasn't sincere. The problem is what Himmler was sincere about doing, and what he genuinely considered would make the world a better place. So that said, I came along like in the poverty program era, right? And I got to watch that, those dynamics up close and personal too, right? And like I said, a whole lot of being able to figure stuff out in this world doesn't have to do with being smart. It's got more to do with keeping your eyes open and paying attention to what's going on in concrete ways. And there's a notion of what it means to be an activist. First of all, that's evolved over recent decades, right? Some of it has its roots, like in the emergence of what's now called identity politics, in the academy over the late 80s, 90s, whatever. So people genuinely believe that they are trying to make the world a better place, and they're trying to fight oppression and like inequality and injustice. One name that comes to mind is DeRay McKesson, right? I'm sure that DeRay McKesson sincerely believes that charter schools, as he said, are one of the most phenomenal innovations of recent decades. I suspect he believes that partly because he doesn't know any better. He believes that because it's in his material interest not to know any better. He was a TFA functionary, right? And the nice thing about blackness as a political position is that it can encompass anything, right? This is another lesson that one could have just from having been around the Black Power era and the forms of radicalism that emerged out of Black Power, right? Racial authenticity, first of all, it doesn't exist, right? Right, that's the first point, right? There's no such thing as racial authenticity because a claim always provokes or should provoke, according to whom, right? Who says? Right. Who is the arbiter of what counts as racial authenticity? I was on a panel at Yale that the Black Graduate Students Group organized in the mid '80s, and there was a panel on it was not long after my book on the Jesse Jackson phenomenon came out, and it was a panel on the role of the Black church in Black politics. And one of the moderators said to me at one point, kind of snidely, that I didn't really understand the Black church because I didn't come up in the Black church, because I, like a whole lot of other Black people, like in South Louisiana, as well as, by the way, Cuba, Brazil, Venezuela, Dominica, was raised Catholic, right? So somehow, right, that's not authentically Black.
Yeah.
Right. But, so that just throws into relief like the folly of all that kind of stuff. But when it gets to politics, then it's really ultimately a class politics, right? Because in the first place, nationalism, like, is always the ideology of the bourgeoisie and the professional and the managerial strata whose fantasies are that they'll be able to run stuff, right? But coming down from from that plane of sort of high dogma, if not high theory. What's appealing about racial authenticity as the metric of political legitimacy is that if you who can most effectively press claims to be the authentic spokesperson. I mean, like I've been asking the whole time I've been teaching, how does one get to be a black leader, right? There's never been a job description written for it, right? So, but when you think about it historically, like the job was invented by and for Booker T. Washington, right? There was no such thing as a black leader or a Negro leader before Washington. I mean, not even Douglas. Partly because black people voted and had civic voice on their own. But the answer to the question how one gets to be a black leader has always been the same. You get to be a black leader by being recognized as a black leader by powerful white people. So that's where the racial authenticity gets you, which is the irony of it all, right?
Yeah.
But so now, though, with the insidious role of, in fact, I was at a dissertation defense in my department yesterday afternoon, but the student wrote a very good, good dissertation on bogus reforms in the juvenile justice system around the country. Right? She took 3 state cases and built out from that. But one of the things that she found is that, and presumably viewers who work in this area know this, but that the Annie Casey Foundation and the MacArthur Foundation are deeply entrenched in sustaining, supporting, reproducing, shaping like a layer of so-called community-based organizations and nonprofits all over the country that provide careers and career ladders for people, many of whom genuinely believe that what they're doing is working for reform to make things better. Because we've also had the evolution over the last 20 years of bogus notions like, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good, to which I always respond by saying, well, don't let what's possible blind you to what's actually necessary, right? Because it may not be the same thing.
Right.
And like this has gone on like in the housing area. John David Arena did a great book called Driven from New Orleans on the ongoing attack, the 40-year attack on the public housing in the city of New Orleans, which is also driven partly by community-based groups, basically, that are funded by and thus accountable to bigger foundations and nonprofits who represent themselves and are represented as the authentic voices of the community, right? So they're just kind of layers of this insidious dynamic of neoliberal social administration that's also a form of race relations administration that it would be important for us to unpack. And it's much more complex than can be captured by simplistic analogies like the Jim Crow or to slavery, right? So I feel like I've given another speech on how to make white.
But in this context, right? It's not only just the being explained by the language of Jim Crow or different tropes that we use to identify white supremacy today. It's the fact that neoliberals actually have co-opted that language masterfully and have used it against black, particularly poor working class black people, to the detriment. Like we see this narrative that's been woven against Bernie Sanders, and it was a masterful stroke just from a political observer perspective. The idea that Bernie Sanders could not possibly understand the plight of black people, even though he was carrying a message of economic justice, versus Hillary Clinton, who obviously understands black people, even though she was carrying a message of economic neoliberalism, which is obviously detrimental to black people. They have mastered this art form. And by they, I'm talking about black people who are leveraging this against black people. Speak to that for me.
Oh yeah, no, no, look, I mean, no question, man. I mean, yeah, I mean, no question, at all. And I mean, on the Clinton thing too. Well, I had 2 points to make about this. One of them is that, back in the day, right, like when I was young and when stuff like this could be a real issue, when I looked at the ways that some of those showboat moves got made on Sanders. I said to friends, I said, if something like this had happened, like in the late '60s or in the early '70s, the first thought would be that this is a police action, right? But and I'm not really even trying to say in a coy way that that's what it is now. But you're right. I mean, and it works well. Just to underscore your point, like you remember, and I'm sure that many of the viewers do too, that at one point, I think a couple of months ago, when Clinton said someplace, if you break up the banks, that wouldn't end racism,
Yes.
and it wouldn't end sexism, right? And that just said to me very clearly, okay, so this is the way they want to play it,
Yeah.
right? And my good friend, Professor Willie Leggett, who's a political scientist and old friend and comrade of mine since graduate school, who teaches at South Carolina State, is the author of one of the most powerful and significant lines in the last generation in the study of black politics. Said a number of years ago, and I've quoted it every time I get a chance, that the only thing that hasn't changed about black politics since 1965 is how we think about it. But he also pointed out, last time I was down there, he had found this really great statement. I can email it to you after you get off the air, but from V.O. Key in his classic 1949 book, Southern Politics in State and Nation. And what he quoted to me was what Key said about the role that race played in South Carolina politics in 1949. And it was kind of standard understanding that race was a way to deflect attention from the fact that all of the elements in South Carolina politics in the mainstream, of course then it was a one-party state, were in a league with rich people, capital, and the employer class, and race was a way to deflect attention from the fact that that's the interest that they were governing on behalf of. And Willie's point was that you could look at what was happening, and this was like when we were building up to the South Carolina primary. His point was you could look at what was happening in South Carolina politics at today and say a version of the same thing with slight modifications to accommodate the fact that it wasn't just whites motivating anti-black racism, but it was like black politicians as well who use race to draw black voters' attention away from the fact that they also are governing on behalf of the ruling class ultimately. And I've noticed, like years ago, like when we were working in South Carolina, and I think this is true of a lot of states in the South. In fact, Professor Leggett and I have like a 20-year thing going on as to which set of black politicians is the worst and most venal and in the country. Those in South Carolina or those in Louisiana. So it's like a tribal thing. But it's been very clear that both Democrats and Republicans have a commitment to making race the only fault line in politics in that state. And the difference between 1949 and 2016 is that the black politicians and the Democrats operate in the same way. Well, not in the same way, but they have the same commitment to making the race issue central and overriding everything else, right, in the state. So, and I mean, like I said, that's true in a lot of places, and it's true in most places. I think we saw while the dynamics in the Chicago mayoral race were more, way more complex, but the role of the black political class there
Hmm.
in lining up behind Rahm Emanuel just kind of throws into relief where their commitments are, like in the same way that they're lining up behind Clinton is done now.
Someone and I can't think of where I read this, but they said that the one thing that and actually you alluded to this a few moments ago, the one good thing about this election is that it has exposed the fact that the democratic the black democratic establishment is all but inseparable from the Democratic Party, right? These black leaders that we look at to do things that are in the best interest of the black community, they have been fully exposed to do things that's really just in the best interest of the Democratic establishment. And I think everything that you just described really just puts a fine point on that reality. I like what you said earlier about we're playing with house money. And I in the sense that we actually are ahead of the game and not behind the game, but also in the sense that this election has exposed a lot to people who may have been asleep to the reality of politicians that they've placed their trust in and where their alliances really lie.
Right.
Let me shift gears one moment and talk more about just explicitly about race and class. I went through this fast food place today. I had no business going, and I ordered some food from an older African American woman, and I got a conversation going with her. She's from Alabama. Her name is Mabel. Nobody knows her, so I'll say her name. Mabel, sweetheart, loved her to death, and I stayed in that line long enough to just observe her and see how old she was and how hard she was hustling to keep up with that pace. And actually, I've talked with her before, and she is a Hillary Clinton supporter. And she's a proud Hillary Clinton supporter. And I get it. She can support whoever she wants. But I couldn't help but see the irony of her trying to survive in this world that's demanding her to work in her twilight years, and in an environment that's not going to pay her enough to live, still being proud to align with someone who at a minimum is not going to do anything to affect that reality. If she doesn't make it worse like Republicans may, Clinton is not going to do anything to fix that. And here we are completely incapable of having a conversation with about a class construct because race is blocking us from having that conversation. And I just couldn't help but to see how, not just an irony, but the sad irony of how many African Americans and Americans in general, particularly older Americans, who are trapped in this economic paradigm, and we can't even have a substantive conversation about how to fix that. How do we begin that conversation, and how do we help people who are being hurt by this system to realize that we've been hoodwinked for a very long time?
Well, I mean, that's another good one. I mean, yeah, look, you're absolutely right, man, and I share your poignance. I mean, because it's only going to get worse, right? I mean, that's the thing about it, right? At some point, unless we can make an effective counterweight, there is going to be the grand bargain on Social Security, and I've been saying lately too. I mean, like the Republicans just cut public services and say, I'm just cutting it, right? Because I don't care about you, and demonize people who are victimized by it. Mm-hmm. But the Democratic way of doing it is by a sleight of hand, right? The claim, and like as a New Orleanian man, this just brings Katrina to my mind, but this notion that you can do more with less, right? And we're smart. So we're going to cut the budget, but it's really only fat, and we can, deliver the services just as well, blah, 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 blah. Well, as Buckminster Fuller said, like in the 70s, you don't do more with less. You do more with more, you do less with less. That's why they call more, and they call less. And what doing more with less means is Katrina. What doing more with a less means is Flint. What it means is like the rotting infrastructure of the DC Metro. It's like it's like what's felt almost like a water main break somewhere every week in the city of Philadelphia for the last year and a half.
Yeah.
Because it's a flim-flam, right? I mean, that said, look, I mean, I don't think that people are duped. I think one of the problems is, and like this gets to the core question of how to try to go about changing this.
Mm-hmm.
One of the problems with tying politics to the election cycle is you've got to operate within the dominant common sense, right? Because the time frame, like for getting stuff done, is too short, and the kind of contact that you have to have with people to try to build electoral support is too thin. Okay. What I thought, so I mean, that's one reason that I never thought that the Sanders campaign would be, you know, the magic intervention that sort of sparks the mass movement,
Mm-hmm.
right? But what it can be, and still can be, and there's a good chance for this, is that it can be the occasion for galvanizing. Yeah, like it's going to spawn a lot of electoral activity, and some of it's going to be more reasonable than others of it. Some of it's going to be more successful than other initiatives. But the big promise of this thing, from my perspective, is that it can help to bring together people who are committed to make to an ideal of more fundamental and broad, or well, I don't want to say fundamental because that sounds like a cliche, but of concrete social transformation, right? Kind of reasserting the centrality of public goods and public services,
Yeah.
right? Reasserting the importance of employment over combating inflation, turning around, right, the sharply skewed mechanisms that support steadily intensifying upward redistribution.
Mm-hmm.
None of that stuff. So that means specifically stuff like free public higher education. I think free public transportation is also a not insane goal, but a serious national healthcare system. We've got the third best third best healthcare system between here and the equator, right? And the most expensive in the world at the same time. You know, little Cuba, which is where a lot of my family is a much better than we are, and it's insane. But we don't get there overnight, and we don't get there through chatting on MSNBC. Mm. How we get there is through building relationships of standing with people in union locals, neighborhoods, churches, softball leagues, other community configurations and of interest groups, by trying to find ways to inject local concerns and struggles with this perspective that sees them as elements, moments, pieces of a bigger project, right? And not just what I hate to use this because it's like foundation speak, but not just interest groups in the various issue silos, right? Mm-hmm. But that takes time to develop the kind of relationships among activists even that are necessary. A good friend of mine has been linked to the Workers' Party in Brazil since its beginning, and he's pointed out that they were in existence like for 6 years before they ran a serious election campaign. Right, but there's this tendency, like in the U.S. I mean, you may know I was involved with the effort to try to build an independent labor party in the U.S. from beginning to the end. And one of the things we constantly came up against was that people wanted to run candidates before we had any kind of base, right? They wanted to get coverage like on CNN or whatever, like they'd ever give an initiative, I mean, like that a fair hearing. So, I mean, there's a tendency, and I understand the tendency because things are bad, and they're steadily getting worse. And there's this sense of urgency, right, that we've got to do something. Well,
Right.
but we didn't get into this situation overnight. Like, we're not going to get out of it overnight. And yeah, there's a lot of what has to happen is really going to be, for the foreseeable future, struggles to try to stop the bleeding, right?
Yeah.
And fend off like the worst possible kinds of initiatives. But those don't convert automatically into getting on the offensive. So so a key thing for us, for our side, I think, is to try to figure out how to get on the political offensive, right? I mean,
Yeah.
I often say, like in the stump, that our interests got more from Richard Nixon than we've gotten from any of the three Democratic presidents since then, or will from the fourth. And it's not because Nixon liked us anymore, or believed in the things that we believed in. The difference was that the social movements that our interests were born by, right, were stronger and had more political capacity and couldn't be ignored. But we got the EPA from Nixon, we got OSHA from Nixon, we got affirmative action from Nixon, we got wage and price controls from Nixon. And every Democratic president since then, starting with my one-time governor, Jimmy Carter, has moved farther and farther in the direction that has since come to be called neoliberalism.
I know I've had you for a while here, Professor Reed. Do you have time for one more question that
Sure.
I have
Yeah,
to
absolutely.
unpack? You, in an interview with Bill Moyers, you were discussing an encounter in your university where a student, and actually let me just read it here because I have it here. And you were speaking in context of President Obama and his approach to change, and you're saying that you recalled an incident in a seminar in Black American political thought with a young woman who was a senior and said something in class, and you just blurted out, and essentially she was saying that they came to the point of the civil rights movement was so that they could go to these elite universities and they could go and be a part of the top 1%. And you said that you gave the example that if Viola Luiso knew that would be the punchline and that would be the purpose of her sacrifice and her death, that she may have stayed at home. The question that I want to ask is, particularly in the context of African Americans, but also more broadly in people who are working for progress, how do we not fall into the trap? And this is an ambiguous question, but take the pieces of it that you want to. How do we not fall into that trap of success, where the expectation is that everything that we're fighting for is simply to get a bigger piece of the pie without anyone ever looking at how that pie is pieced together being problematic?
Right. Well, that's another good question. And by the way, she didn't essentially say that. She said it exactly. It's just why I blurted out the response that I did. I was just kind of so taken aback by it, and it was specifically to go to Yale and then go to work for Morgan Stanley, basically. But well, look. Here's the thing. I think one thing that we have to do, and I think this is another problem, like with anti-racist discourse and the ways that and really all the identity discourses and the way that they sort of perfume class dynamics, that we've got to start treating Black political dynamics, and you can say the same thing about Latinos and the other interest groups, as something special that's immune to or exists outside of the class dynamics that shape American politics more generally. Here's a specific, and this is something I've written recently. I hope will be out within a year or so, I trust. But in thinking about what's happened in Black urban politics since the Voting Rights Act, right? A number of years ago, actually 28 years ago, I did an article that was fairly widely read, like in academic circles, that was an examination of what we call the Black urban regime. And I was on a panel at a conference a couple of years ago where the respondents or the panelists kind of challenged me in a non-combative way, to revisit that argument and asked how I would change or update it, which I thought was a really good and useful thing to do. So I did it, and what I've seen, and I admit, like a lot of it is based on the case study of New Orleans. For quirky reasons, I've got a lot of inroads into the Black political class there for a long time. But what you see is what you would expect to see, right? So now we've had Black people going to the same elite institutions that their white peers go to for 40, 50 years now. Their kids have gone to the same institutions. They live in the same neighborhoods. They have the same cultural tastes, same consumer preferences. They buy the same stuff. They like the same coffee shops. They have the same hierarchies of consumption preferences and senses of what a good neighborhood is and what a good school is, and so forth and so on. What's been developing isn't, and see, this is one of the reasons that I don't like constructs like the Miss Leadership class. Although I count Glenn Ford as a friend and have the utmost respect for his critical voice, or notions that they're selling out the interest of the Black community, whatever, because what's actually happening when we think about it in kind of really sociologically neutral terms is that what's emerged from these dynamics, and this is one of the victories of the civil rights movement on the terms that we want it, is that at the local level and to some extent the national level, what we've got is a more or less biracial or interracial governing class now, right? That they have the same commitments, right? I mean, and the Black ones are race conscious, and they're also committed to diversity and multiculturalism and cosmopolitanism, but they're race conscious. They're as race conscious as anybody else. In fact, statistically, they're even more likely to be race conscious than the working class Black people. And there's this sense, my colleague Michael Dawson, I made this argument back in the 90s, in the mid 90s, that as you move up the income and education ladder, Black people become more race conscious. And he saw this as an anomaly, right? Because it didn't seem to comport with modernization theory. But if you consider the possibility that race consciousness is a class program, then it makes all the sense in the world that the richer you are, the more race conscious that you're likely to be, because the more likely it is that your social position is in some way or another connected with what I've been calling, for want of anything better, the race relations management industry, right?
Yeah.
Both in the public and private world. But a good friend of mine who was also at the University of Chicago and did a bid as deputy provost for diversity. He told me after he got in it for a while, he realized there's a multi-billion-dollar industry out there pimping. The diversity thing, right? Corporate, private sector, public sector, whatever. So what's happened is that what we should expect to happen, right? That once formal racial barriers decline or are eliminated, and barriers to pursuit of a meritocratic ideal of equality of opportunity, which after all is what a wing of the civil rights movement or a node of the civil rights movement was always principally interested in, once that victory is won, then what's going to happen over time is that race doesn't disappear, certainly, and race consciousness doesn't disappear, but race consciousness takes class forms and forms that are consistent with the class connections and the class world that these people live in. So that's why, like, for instance, after Katrina, when when Mitch Landrieu was elected mayor, the first white mayor since his father was mayor in the 70s, and when the black majority was lost on the city council, there was a lot of caterwauling like all over the country, and this was around the same time that a white woman was challenging Kasim Reed for the mayoralty in Atlanta, which turned out to be a close race. But there's a lot of pulling of hair and tearing of clothes and gnashing of teeth all over the country about this loss of black power. And I kept saying, well, I don't see how anything's going to change, right? Like the local ruling class has made clear that they're satisfied with the current arrangements. I mean, they're getting everything they want out of it. And like in New Orleans in particular, like you also got the way that race is connected with the heritage tourism industry. Nobody really wanted to upset the apple cart.
Yeah.
And it's not even just an instrumental thing, right? I mean, it's not unreasonable to consider that blacks, whites, and Latinos in that class share commitments to a lot of the same ideals, like multiculturalism and diversity, right? They want to send their kids to diverse schools. They want to, live in neighborhoods that they would like to think are diverse. Although, ironically, it's the professional and managerial strata who actually live the most segregated lives in America. And I think that's one of the reasons that they're so formally committed to a discourse of diversity, because it's part of being able to convince themselves that they're so much better than those benighted white working class people out there. So
go ahead.
So anyway, yeah.
You actually, so you actually reminded me of something that you said in your piece on Rachel Dolezal, and I'll let you go, but I just want to read this, where you said identity politics is not an alternative to class politics. It is a class politics, the politics of the left wing of neoliberalism. It is the expression and the active agency of a political order and moral economy in which capitalist market forces are treated as unassailable nature. So essentially, I shouldn't be surprised by this phenomenon, because it is part and parcel of the entire construct of using race as a type of class politic.
Right. Wow. Well, yeah, and look, I think like the last 12 months have like underscored that argument like a dozen times, right?
Yeah.
I mean, right, because the Democratic primary race could not have made that clearer.
Yeah. Professor Reed, thank you so much for taking this time with me. I really can't thank you enough. Hopefully I can have you back sometime.
Yeah, I'd love to do it anytime. Just let me know.
Absolutely. And again, actually, I meant to say this at the top. You keep mentioning you're from New Orleans. And so, just across the Lake Pontchartrain, there's a small city called Franklinton, Louisiana. Are you familiar with it?
I know it very well. I went down there when I was in high school, man, to play Franklin High in a basketball game, and it kind of freaked me out because you drive down there, and for much of the trip, there's like nothing but water all around you.
Yeah.
And last Thanksgiving, actually, when I was down to visit my mother, I went with some friends up the River Road, right, all the way past the Bonnie Carré Spillway, and
Yep.
And all that stuff in those cane parishes where I think the planter class tried to keep the 13th Amendment out of people's minds for like 150 years.
As long as they possibly could. But
as long as they could, yeah.
Yeah, that's where my family roots go back in Franklinton, Louisiana, about 4 or 5 generations, really to the point where it cuts off, and I can't go any further back because of what happened to us. But anyway, thank you, Professor Reed. Thank you so much for this time, and I'll be in touch with you via email. Could you just tell everyone how to get up with you if they wanted to learn more about your research or some of your scholarship?
Right. Well, I mean, the best way to reach me, I guess, would be by my pen email, which is, I'm in the political science department at the University of Pennsylvania, but my email is Reed, REEDAL, at sas.upenn.edu.
Awesome. Thanks again so much, and I will be reaching out to you soon, and you have a pleasant evening.
All right. Thanks. Hey, I have a question for you.
Yeah, sure.
How can I access the podcast?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I'll send you links. You can go to bpdlive.com and you can get the audio and the video version of the podcast. But I'll send it to you in the email as soon as the show's over.
Great. Thanks a lot, man.
Hey, my pleasure. 857-600-0518. We're going into overtime because we talked about so much. And it was, I'm sorry, it was, if you've been paying attention to this election at all, then you have picked up on probably 90% of what Professor Reed was discussing, and the use of identity politics as a means of suppressing a class-based argument, and how, but the interesting thing about it was that at the end, he really told me that I shouldn't be surprised by this, that this is the natural outflow of, this is often the thing that you can expect once you get a more diverse and a more multicultural group, let's call them a cohort of black kids, Asian kids, Latino kids, white kids growing up together or going to the same diverse universities, and coming out with the same type of training. It almost should be expected that you would have a class of people who use race for the purposes of forwarding their own economic and political best interests. No big surprise there. So likewise, just like we shouldn't be surprised with President Obama's endorsement of Hillary Clinton, it really is just a natural outgrowth of what they firmly believe. And I actually like what he said. It's not something for us. It's not always a nefarious thing, was the sentiment that I got from him, as much as it is some of them really genuinely believe this. The problem is we have to bring an alternative. We have to bring something that is not just an alternative, but a replacement. And it's incumbent upon us to be those voices that offer something that is different to the manipulations of race to the detriment of class, of all races. Poor black people, poor white people, poor Latinos are being hurt by these economic paradigms. But anyway, before I go into all that, I've been talking enough. Let me take this call. Caller, you're live on the air. What is your name, comment, and or question?
Hello.
Yes, hello. Who am I speaking
Hello?
with? Yep, this is you.
Scotty.
Scotty,
from Columbus, Ohio.
Scotty from Columbus. We've spoken before, man. Good to hear from you. What's on your mind?
Good to hear from you again. I love Adolph Reed. Been reading his work for a while, and was even surprised to see him with Cornel West at that. It was at some forum that he had because they were both supporting Bernie Sanders. So his outlook on identity politics is spot on. I've seen this play out. This is actually the first year I've seen identity politics really become especially toxic, because a lot of people look at their own experiences, and it's understandable about race and how it plays out. And unfortunately, what happens is they listen to people like Joy Reid, John Lewis. They listen to certain celebrities who they admire and respect, and they are not necessarily receptive to the class politics. And part of that is because they're distrust of white liberals, which is understandable at certain points. But also it gets used as a detriment, because I remember. And I know how you feel about how Bernie Sanders, the whole issue with Black Lives Matter.
Yeah.
But, and this is where you said, I remember you said that this is why people hate the left. I remember Angela Davis speaking about how Bernie didn't use the right pronouns about gender, whatnot. And it gets to a point where it's just like people, like working class people, don't necessarily take you seriously.
Yeah.
You know, and it gets to the point where it's
almost
gets
seen as
frustrating.
ridiculousness. Yeah. Yes, Scotty. I think you're spot on with that, man. I laughed so hard because as much as I'm a Bernie bro. I am a brocialist, Democratic socialist, and I identify with the left tremendously. There are sundry times when white progressives get on my last damn nerves. And it's nothing against you guys, it's just but I put it in context. I understand that unless someone gives you the language and expresses the need for a particular type of language and a particular type of understanding, you have no context. I go to work every day with bros all day long, and I understand that they unless somebody explains to them, they have no context by which to understand what I'm upset about. Right. So that's why I laughed about it. But I don't let that trump, no pun intended, I don't let that trump the important conversations that need to be had about class just because some of my white friends don't understand the problems of race. So, Scotty, thanks so much for that call, man. I want to reach out to my dude Nicholas Nolan, who has been itching to get in on this conversation, with Adolph Reed, but unfortunately, while I pull up Nick, I want to give a shout out to my sister from another Mister, Noah Changa, because she really, I messed up. I reached out to Professor Reed, and Noah had already mentioned that she wanted to do an interview with Professor Reed. So, Professor Reed, if you're listening and still watching, I'm going to reach out to you and ask that if you would, the next interview, if you would do it with my sister, my co-host, Noah Changa, because she's first of all, a phenomenal thinker and leader, and she really was the one who was supposed to do this interview because she expressed it, and me not paying attention and me just being ambitious, I was just hustling like, I got to talk to Professor Reed, and didn't put two and two together. So Noah, I'm sorry, but I'm glad we had this conversation. So you got next, and the next big interview, I'll make sure that you get in on it. But that being said, I'm bringing in my dude, Nick. Nick, how's it going, man? Actually, let me take you off mute here. What's on your mind, man?
Actually, not much. I just want to come in. Professor Reed really gave a lot more articulate analysis as to what I've always, championed the entire time. Like, we really shouldn't be letting this type of stuff distract from the actual material situation. And when people move up into a class or they're surrounded by certain people, they have an identity, a shared identity, a common interest that they're naturally going to express, which is the same argument I make about Barack Obama. When he went and lived and worked and learned amongst the elite, he becomes one of them and he sees things from their perspective. It's the same argument I'll make about Hillary Clinton. As a multimillionaire business owner and things of that nature, she's going to see things based off of what her class, how they see things. And that's just completely different from what's needed when you're talking about someone having the perspective of a middle class or just like an average working person. And that's why I really feel like we kind of failed in that regard. But I think at this point, this is what I've been saying the entire time, we need to start battling for the ideas. Like the meritocracy, we have to break it. Neoliberalism, we have to break it. And we can't break it just by assuming that, we can wait till election time comes around. We really need to start with the next generation. I'm sorry to say it like this, but for the most part, many members of the baby boomers, they're gone. They've been propagandized for 40 or 50 years. It's too late for them. However, the Gen X, the millennial generation, and generation after that, if we can really start battling for the ideas and the hearts and minds of people, we can really start to do something, because a campaign can't counteract 40 years of propaganda. It just can't. No matter how much outreach you put out there, you cannot change somebody's mind. It's just an outreach campaign from a particular campaign. That has to be won through
on the ground,
massive grassroots activism. Years in advance for the campaign to even come, because the propagandized mind is just not even open to the message. They have to be open to the message to even hear what you're saying. And I think a friend of mine always says this whenever I talk to someone about politics. He goes, "Nick, he's hearing you, but he ain't hearing you." And I was like, oh man, Whenever he says that, it really makes me laugh. But that's what we're faced with here.
Yeah.
We're faced with a situation where you have people who have made it to where they have made it. Maybe it's based off of anti-discrimination laws or,
Yeah.
affirmative action that may have allowed them to get there. But now that they're there,
But
they see that that they've got there on their own merit, and there was no
hmm
help, and that's all there is to it. And everybody just needs to pick up their bootstraps and
yep.
and make something happen for themselves, rather than
Here's
looking
a
at the systemic situation. Go ahead.
here's the question that I should have thought to ask Professor Reed, and actually, hell, the more I talk, the more my coffee wears off, and I'm getting sleepy, and I'm forgetting my question. Here it is: the real intersectionality, right? If you're going to really be intersectional, you have to bring in voices that are not in the elite class. You have to bring in leadership from someone from the working class, somebody. And to me, that is the most impossible type of intersectionality to have an expectation for, because can you imagine people intentionally including someone who makes $30,000 a year in a decision that's going to affect everyone across the nation? I mean, poor people would be appalled, black people would be appalled, white people would be appalled, because we have this natural predilection to want to be ruled by people who are elite. What do you think about that, man?
I don't know. I'm 50-50. So
Okay.
I do want individuals that are not a part of the formalized elite to be in the decision-making process.
Hmm.
However, there's a difference between somebody who's not elite and somebody who's educated, or somebody who knows what the situation is or understands some sort of
Ah,
technical aspect of the
but
issue.
you're
So
running to, let me
let's
cut you,
say,
let me push back on you, because you're running into this this thought that Professor Reed was actually unpacking today, that we have this natural alignment and expectation that or we make this correlation, that's the phrase I'm looking for, this correlation between intellect and elitism, right? Like some of the people that we think are smart and elite are probably some of the, most, they might have a lot of degrees, but probably some of the dimmest people that we ever run into. So, how do you avoid that? We have your first reaction to it, not to put you on blast, but this is everyone's, even mine. Our first reaction is, if somebody's making $30,000 a year, they probably don't have as much education or intelligence, a proxy for intelligence, as someone who's making $150,000 a year. You and I both know this construct, but you and I just fell into the same exact thing.
well, actually, I wasn't making it based off of what they make. If it's really not about what they make, it's about what they know and what they understand. So what I would argue is that my version of elitism is not saying you need to have the best people from Harvard or all these elite colleges. I'm saying get individuals that actually have expertise on the issue, or that
Hmm.
actually understand some sort of insight on the issue that's backed up by empirical data that matches, right? Like, you can't have someone saying, well, this is how it works. And if you look at their thesis and you look at what's happened in the past, it's a clear 180, which is what we have with the economics profession today. So we can't have that kind of thing going on. But at the same time, that's not to say we just pick random Joe Smo off the street who's been propagandized to believe things that may not be true just as well as anybody else. It's not necessarily an academic thing, or a smart versus dumb or something like that. It really is somebody who understands an issue versus somebody who does not. Limited versus in-depth knowledge.
Yeah,
It's
but
not really an elite or how much you make or what your credentials are. It's really, do you have an
but
understanding of something?
when do we ever place that specific expectation on? I mean, hell, we just came from 8 years of George W. Bush, right? To just be, hyperbolic, not even hyperbolic, it's just quite true, understanding of the problem. We don't really put that expectation on people so long as they're stamped with a certain type of elitism. It comes with, it's baked into the system for people who went to Harvard, even though the person who went to Harvard might not know as much as somebody who went to Mississippi State University, right? Or not even Mississippi State, because that's quasi elite, Jackson State, right? So we have this rubber stamp of acceptance and belief in their ability to lead us based on their economic strata and or their education strata, that what type of elitism. And so, but to go full circle to my point is that, this intersectionality falls off completely when we consider class, because everyone who is in our ruling class has this expectation that you just have to pull yourself up by your bootstraps. And if you're only making so much, that's really your fault. You either didn't go to the right school or you just didn't work hard enough while you were at the right school. Let me
Yeah, I think
go
the
ahead.
the myth of
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say, I think the myth of meritocracy is probably one of the most devastating
Yeah.
blows that we have to real progressivism,
Yeah.
and that's why I mean I've waged a personal war against that and corporatism, like right off the bat. Those are two things that you really have to combat because they lend themselves to almost a neoliberal outlook on the world without any type of reality-based,
Yeah.
analysis whatsoever. And it's really hard to counteract that, like you just spoke about. Unless somebody has certain credentials, we don't trust them, or we don't listen to them, or they don't know what they're talking about. And what I'm saying is, you don't use their credentials to understand what they're talking about. You listen to what they actually have to say and what their analysis is, and compare it to what the
Yeah.
actual empirical data is, and that's how you decide who
Yeah.
knows what they're talking about and who does not. It's meritocratic, right? But it's
Mm-hmm.
meritocratic in its own right, like it's a true meritocratic sense, like
Yeah.
not a faux meritocratic sense. It's not just like what your name is or who put a stamp on your analysis. It's actually what the analysis is,
Somebody
like a
help me
fact
out.
based.
It's
Each
the
person knows something.
and I can't vouch for the system because I never worked in the system, but the testing service, when you want to work for the government, you either have the political appointment or you have a merit based appointment, and they have an entire testing procedure for almost every level where you have to pass a certain do you know what's the title of that? It escapes me this time of night, but
I
but
don't. I
but I
don't
know
work
what you
for
mean.
the government, so I
Somebody's
can't.
going to put it. Somebody's going to put it in the chat room for us after the show is over. Nick, thanks so much. I want to clear the lines for at least one more caller before I call tonight, man.
No problem.
All right, talk to you soon.
Thank you.
857-600-0518. So Elizabeth Warren has formally endorsed Hillary Clinton, and she did so on the Rachel Maddow show. She formally endorsed her for president on the show tonight. So Rachel Maddow asked her the question of whether or not she, as in Elizabeth Warren, would be ready for the commander-in-chief position, and she said yes. She said, yes, I am I capable of being the commander-in-chief? Yes, I am, and I am with her, with Hillary Clinton. I don't have anything to say about Elizabeth Warren other than, yay, good on you, Elizabeth Warren. I'll just leave it at that. I still respect you. I have the ability, and hopefully, the more you guys hang out with me, the more you'll have this ability. I don't know if it's a good thing. I think it's a good thing. Some of you probably think it's a bad thing, but I have the ability to simultaneously respect and admire somebody while holding a very principled and at times visceral critique of them. Elizabeth Warren falls into that category now. President Obama will always exist in that category. I will go after an interview with President Obama as I get a larger platform, and I probably won't go after blood, right? I'm going to, at least for the first 30 minutes of the interview, be a fanboy because I like and respect President Obama. And then the second half of the interview, we'll talk about some serious stuff. I only said that to say I don't have anything else negative to say about Elizabeth Warren that I haven't already said. Go see my old videos. I like her. I respect her, but she's not the leader for me. Caller, you are live on the air. What is your name, comment, and or question?
Hey, Ben, it's Jade from Michigan. How are you?
I'm doing good, man. Long time no hear. What's on your mind?
Hey, man, I just, sorry to kind of go off topic to what you've been talking about tonight, but I really like the discussion, but I just wanted to make a story aware to you. Did you, I know you know Redacted Tonight by
Yeah.
Lee Camp. Did you see the story titled, it's a lawsuit through Institute for American Democracy and Integrity, and it's a
Election
lawsuit
fraud?
that might end. But yes. I just wanted to know if you were aware and what your thoughts were. And it just seems like people didn't know what was going on.
I am actually clicking through some links now to get a little bit more information on that. So I will get up to speed. I've been seeing some tweets about it, but I hadn't gotten any definitive sources. So I'll check out Lee and see what he has on it, and I'll be sure to follow up with you guys. with more information. Thanks for the call, 857-600-0518. I have it on my screen now, but I need to digest it before I try to regurgitate it. So yeah, back to Elizabeth Warren. Well, actually, I've already said enough about her. There's a lot that I probably could say about the election fraud, but not yet. Tomorrow night. I'm sorry, not tomorrow night. Tomorrow night we're off. Okay, so let me take a moment here. One thing I'm terrible at, and I actually hear my producer D in my head saying, plug the show. Tell people you need support, right? And bring some structures to the show. I've been listening. I just haven't been good at it. I should do this at the top, middle, and at the end. Well, here we are at the end. Support the Benjamin Dixon Show. We're doing some great things. We're hustling. We're working hard. We work hard all day and all night to bring you this content. I work during the day to pay my bills, and I come and do this at night because I love doing it, one, and two, I think we have something important to say, and I think if you're still here, you believe that too. So help support the Benjamin Dixon Show and the Progressive Army. Go to patreon.com/the BPD Show and make a contribution, a monthly pledge. We're rolling out some membership tiers coming out here soon, but go ahead and make a pledge on Patreon, and you can also, if you don't have any money to pledge, which you can pledge $1 a month. But if you can't do $1 a month, then click the subscribe button on Spreaker, on the podcast, on the YouTube channel. Follow me on Twitter, share our material, like our material, and subscribe to our blog at thebenjamindixonshow.com or theprogressivearmy.com. This is going to be the last caller of the night. Thanks you guys so much for hanging out with me. That's the wrong button. Let me press that button. Caller, you're live on the air. What's your name, comment, and or question?
Hey, man.
Bryce, what's going on, man? How's it going?
Hello?
Yeah, I'm here. I can hear you good. What's
doing
up?
Good. Just been, I'm doing good. Just been working a lot. Well, when it comes to Elizabeth and Obama, it's not totally shocking, but it is kind of disappointing. I can tell on your voice. And obviously, the thing is, you want to make sure Trump doesn't get president, but then the Republicans are like turning on him. And now they want us and Romney to run. And so I think this race is still interesting somewhat. I mean, Bernie saying he's still going to go to Philadelphia. So I guess we'll see what happens. But, I don't know. What do you think is going to happen? What do you think?
Oh, I know what's going to happen.
Before you go.
Yeah.
What do you think might happen?
Yeah, actually, and you know what? You reminded me of another question that I did not remember to ask Professor Reed, because we just got into the conversation so thick. I wanted to know what he thought should happen with Bernie Sanders. I'll tell you what I believe will happen with Bernie Sanders. It's the exact same thing that President Obama did. I believe Bernie Sanders is going to endorse Hillary Clinton. I believe he's going to go out and campaign for Hillary Clinton. When he does it is the big question. Will he do it before the convention? No, I don't think he will. Will he do it at the convention? Depends on the concessions that he gets while he's at the convention, which is why he's waiting until the convention. I think he should continue fighting until the convention and take no prisoners at the convention. I do not expect on any given day of the week, ladies and gentlemen, anyone, in my opinion, and you came here for my opinion, and if you don't like my opinion, I still love you. You can leave, but I still love you, right? In my opinion, anyone who is telling you that there's a possibility for Bernie Sanders to win just by some type of protest in Philly is misleading you. It is absurd and obscene and ridiculous to have an expectation that protest in Philly will result in a Sanders nomination. I told you I will always tell you the truth. The only way Sanders gets the nomination is if Hillary Clinton gets indicted. Period. And I already told you, I don't believe Hillary Clinton is going to get indicted, because I do believe some people are above the law. Not rightfully so, and it shouldn't be that way, but I believe that even if there was something, that the system protects itself, and Hillary Clinton is too important to the Democratic Party right now for it not to protect itself at every level of the law. And it could turn out to be that the emails, whatever, let them do their investigation. But I don't think she's going to be indicted. So that being said, Hillary Clinton, in my opinion, is the Democratic nominee. And to that end, Bernie Sanders is going to endorse her. Bernie Sanders is going to stump for her. My only question is, what concessions will he get for it? The other night, I said that he should go for the VP spot because it would be a permanent enshrinement of the progressive movement in the very heart of neoliberalism, in the sense that neoliberalism can't exist or can't obtain power without progressives. I think it will be a constant thorn in the eyes of everyone who opposes progressives. I think more importantly than those first two things, I think as a VP, he would be a central rallying point for progressives for the next 4 years, if we allow it to be. A lot of visceral response in saying, hell no, he should never align with Hillary Clinton. He should not, and I get it. You have your opinion too. I respect your opinion. I got it. But in my opinion, that only happens. Bernie Sanders is only a sellout if you view obtaining power and maintaining power, living to fight another day, as selling out. And I don't. I view that as putting Bernie Sanders on a platform for the next 4 years for which he can be the central focus rallying point for progressives. Now, can he do that as the Senate Majority Leader? Yeah, he actually could. Will the Senate be taken back by Democrats? Depends on how much damage Donald Trump does to it. But here's the thing about that. That's a promise and an expectation that they can fulfill later. That Hillary Clinton can promise, okay, we're going to make you the Senate Majority Leader. She can make that promise and absolutely recant on that promise. She can't recant on him being the VP. And I don't think Bernie Sanders should endorse her without getting some extremely significant concessions. I don't think waiting on the promise of the Senate Majority Leader or even the Senate Minority Leader is something that he should risk an endorsement for. Now, all of that to say, again, anybody telling you that your protest in Philadelphia is going to do anything more than give you an outlet to express your frustration is misleading you. And I'm not here to mislead you on any given day of the week. And I don't believe she's going to be indicted. I have been wrong before, and I will put that out there as a caveat. I am always glad to see that I've been wrong because it helps me remain humble, right? So if I'm wrong and she gets indicted, there's your thing. Bernie Sanders will be the nominee. But I don't think she's going to get indicted. And I think that's the end of the story. And I think at this point, it is what concessions can we extract out of the Democratic Leadership Council wing of the Democratic Party? And what position can we place the progressive movement in? The best position can we place the progressive movement to be sustained over the next 4 years and not go off into disillusionment. And I know I'm way over time, but hell, nobody got to go to work at 5 a.m. but me and you probably. But when Adolph Reed was saying that we're playing with house money, and he said that he doesn't think that he's not downtrodden like a lot of people are right now. It's because he sees what I see. I see that the progressive movement is ahead of the game, considering where we're coming from. Considering the fact that years ago we could not have conversations about income inequality. We could not have conversations about universal single-payer health care. We couldn't have conversations about free public college, universal free public college. We couldn't have those conversations without being red-baited and the Red Scare being used against us, right? We could not publicly say that we were socialists or democratic socialists. And we're at a place now where a movement, which is the most important part of this election, is that a movement has been galvanized. And the only question now is, where does that movement go after this election? If we become disillusioned and throw in our towel and become so frustrated with the system that we no longer use the system against itself, and we just go home, then we lose this movement and we lose everything that we've been working for. And all of the house money that we've won, we would have lost it. I don't think that's the solution. No, not only do I not think, that is absolutely not the solution. The solution, in my opinion, is to obtain and maintain both political power and a platform that we can use to galvanize progressives over the next 4 years, not waiting for the next election, but moving every step of the way towards the next election and towards our next local election and towards local movement politics. All of that to say this: we're going to live to fight another day, and we're going to make the best of this situation. I don't have any other way to say it, but good night. I'm tired. The coffee has worn off. See you guys Monday. Maybe I'll do something tomorrow. I'm feeling it. But later.
The Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.thebenjamindixonshow.com to register for our blog, join the Progressive Army, and support The Benjamin Dixon Show. It's Ben Dixon! If you like this episode, be sure to share, like, and subscribe.
Consider becoming a Patreon. Go to www.patreon.com/The BPD Show and support The Benjamin Dixon Show.